Well, we're acting blindly now. We spend $75 billion on 16 agencies. Then they get a hot lead by the phone call of father, and they can't handle it. I mean, that's blindness. So I think we become blind because there are too many trees, and we can't even see anything when it's laid on a platter. So I think that's the real problem. No, I believe in intelligence gathering. I think good common sense and just reading the news and talking to people and looking at people who want to give you information is a good way to go. But all that money spent, the $75 billion, is spent to try to compensate for the anger we create by a flawed foreign policy. You could spend $150 billion. Your foreign policy is flawed and invites this type of hatred toward us. That money's not going to save us. It just won't work. The more money you spend and the more agencies you have, the more complex it gets and the more information is lost. And I think that is a lot of what happened after 9/11, for the 9/11 is they probably had a ton of information in there. Some people believe it was deliberately ignored, but it's easy for me to understand how they could have so much information in so many agencies. The government is just so inept. So I think it's not serving us well. I don't think the CIA is necessary. I think they are a culprit. I think they're the ones involved in the bombing right now. I think they're involved with torture and rendition and assassinations, rigging of elections. There's no reason for us to have an organization like that in a free society. But then again, you still could have collection of information by people who claim they're your enemies and deal with it. And I think you'd probably have every bit as much information and maybe be able to react more sensibly with it. But nothing will improve our chances of avoiding these crises unless we change foreign policy.
This is Anti-War Radio. I'm talking with Dr. Ron Paul, Republican congressman from the Gulf Coast of Texas. And I'm always impressed, Dr. Paul, by the fact that, when you're on these cable news shows, regardless of what they ask you, you really know all about it. You don't just have, a talking point to go over. You really know all about it. So when they ask you about Iran, you can explain to them. And sometimes I wish, Peter Schiff was watching when you explain that the Iranians, at least as far as anyone knows, are not even making nuclear weapons. The entire basis, the entire premise of our policy of confrontation against them. Could you please explain to the people what it is that you know about Iran? And I see here at original.antiwar.com/Paul, your last article that we published here is called Iran Sanctions Are Precursor to War. So this is not just an academic issue. This is something very important here.
Yeah. Well, if we go by our CIA, the CIA, in their reports they said they haven't been working on they have no evidence they worked on a bomb since 2003. That doesn't mean that I believe that they don't have a secret desire and incentive, but we don't have any evidence. And what we do is we violate the NPT by telling them they're not allowed to have any enrichment. But here, they're permitted under the NPT to enrich, for peaceful purposes and for nuclear energy. But we violate it by saying you can't even do that. So we are the violators of international law, and then we close, we close our eyes to other countries. There are other countries in that region that don't belong to the international community for nuclear power and nuclear bombs. And, Israel and Pakistan and India, they all have them. And we cozy up to them, and they become our allies, and we give money. It's the fact that we can't control a few independent thugs, and that makes us furious. So therefore, then we have to concoct these stories that they're going to have nuclear weapons. I think, I was in the service during the Cold War. The Soviets had like 30,000 nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of hitting us if they really wanted to. And we dealt with them. We talked to them. We remained strong, and we won that by without a nuclear war. But here we have these third world countries. They don't have an army or navy or air force or intercontinental ballistics and no nuclear weapons, and we're generating all this hysteria. But it serves the interest of the military-industrial complex. It serves the interest of saying that our national security requires it. We have to invade another country, and that hopefully someday it will change. The only thing I can tell you as an encouragement is when I go to the college campuses, they don't boo me for those kind of statements as they did at the Republican debates.
Well, I read an interesting quote the other day from Dick Cheney, former vice president, only this is when he was the CEO of Halliburton. And he had taken a trip to Australia in 1998, and he was criticizing Bill Clinton's administration and all the sanctions on Iran, and was saying, I think we could do a lot better if we were to expand and grow these relationships so that we can end up normalizing our relations and doing business. Isn't that strange that Dick Cheney would be the one to sound like you, saying something like that?
Well, I guess they have to pretend there's partisanship and they fight and fume, and there is some partisanship over who controls the power, but ultimately the policies don't ever seem to change.
But it seems like, Halliburton actually really just preferred to make money doing business with Iran rather than waiting and just making all their money off the Iraq war like they were going to do later on.
Yeah, now I'm sure they're lining up for some contracts at present. They did get some contracts in the invasion process and the contractor monies that were spent over there.
All right, now, I just saw a YouTube of you introducing legislation to legalize competing currencies, and this is sort of your other way around. Rather than just outright repealing the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, this is how to make the Federal Reserve obsolete, isn't it?
That's right, and I've always tried to figure out a transition. Some people say, no, you just close the doors and bomb them and open it up, but you ought to have a transition. Like, for instance, in post offices, you have FedEx and UPS, and hopefully they're allowed to deliver first-class mail someday. You don't have to close the post office down in one day. Fortunately, we still have competition in schooling. You can still homeschool in private school, so that helps neutralize a little bit, the public school system. Also in medicine, if they would just, legalize a private option is what I would like, where you could just get out of the system and get all your, get a tax credit for everything you spend. That would be a private option. But then in money, you can have a competing currency. Hayek actually wrote about this, and it's not so extreme. It's just legalizing a constitution, because it was never repealed that a gold and silver had to be legal tender. So you have to repeal the legal tender laws so that the Fed does not have a monopoly. You should legalize the right of a private company to mint a gold coin. They would be held in check by the fraud laws and counterfeit laws. Today there are no fraud and counterfeit laws that apply to the Federal Reserve. And then the last thing you would have to do is make sure you have no taxes on money. You don't tax dollars when you buy dollars or pay capital gains tax because the value of the dollar goes up. But if gold goes up in value, if you pay sales tax when you buy a coin and then you pay a capital gains tax when you spend the coin, it would be ridiculous. It can't be money. So you'd have to do these three things to allow people to use a currency different than the paper money.
Mm-hmm. Well, some opponent of yours on MSNBC would say, yeah, but that would be inflationary to have every bank and every private company introducing their own currency.
No, I didn't say that.
No, I'm saying that's what they would say to you.
Yeah, I would say that they misunderstand, because all I'm doing is legalizing the Constitution that says gold and silver can be legal tender. I'm not doing anything else.
So it wouldn't be inflationary unless you could turn lead into gold.
Yeah, that's it. There would be no inflation, and the value of the gold currency goes up as the value of the paper currency goes down. So no, and sometimes the populace who are sympathetic with what I say like the idea of everybody printing their own money, even the states. But that's prohibited. They're not allowed to emit bills of credit. We're not allowed to print money because they did have horrendous inflation in colonial times. So I don't think that would be a good idea, at least to take that on now. But this would be strictly the gold and silver, which you can't inflate with. You get gold and silver by hard work and effort, and that's why it maintains its value.
Right on. All right. Well, we're all out of time, but I really appreciate your time on the show today.
Okay, Scott. Good to be with you.
All right, y'all. That's Dr. Ron Paul. He's the author of A Foreign Policy of Freedom, The Revolution, A Manifesto, and End the Fed. He represents District 14 on Texas Gulf Coast, and you can find his antiwar.com articles at original.antiwar.com/Paul.